We're breaking down 3 more 2025 NFL draft prospects today on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast.
You are Locked On NFL Scouting with the Draft Dudes, your daily podcast for NFL and college football scouting. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's better than this? It's guys being dudes here on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. We're the Draft Dudes. I'm Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. He's Kyle Crabbs from Locked On Dolphins. And we are your NFL experts here with you daily to talk team building across the league on the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with the Draft Dudes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to issue a big thank you, shout out, and welcome to our everydayers. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase.
Joe, NFL Draft Spotlight today on a couple of prospects. We're looking at 3 potential top 50 is maybe where there's some perception around the trio that we're doing today. But before we get there, I do want to ask you an unrelated college football question.
All right.
How excited are you for Alabama, Georgia this weekend?
I am excited. That's a college football game that's a draw for me in my current approach to college football, if you will. I want to see it. I want to see Milroe for sure. Yeah, Georgia's got dudes all over the place.
He's throwing bombs all over the field. Now, we're not doing quarterbacks yet. We're getting close to opening bell for quarterbacks, but and our evaluations of them here on the show. But he has really grown from us watching his first start against Texas A&M in person. Mm-hmm. We watched that game. And that was a tough game. Alabama snuck it out. It was 24-20. Is that the final score of that game?
Yeah.
A&M's going in and
shot there, yeah.
Has the horrible end of game sequence trying to score the game-winning touchdown. And then Carson Beck on the other side maybe hasn't had as statistically of a robust season as a lot of the other names in the quarterback class. But I really like that he had like a really tough, gritty win against Kentucky, had to make some big throws down the stretch that they smacked him around, showed toughness in the pocket. And I was just listening to, I went back and was doing my cardio yesterday. I had a chance to listen to the whole Sean McVay appearance on The Athletic football, like the sit down interview he did with Robert Mays. Did you catch that from August?
I didn't. No, I wanted to, but
it's so good.
Yeah.
And it's McVay, and he's not just talking like X's and O's, and he talks X's and O's. He talks about their transition from a wide zone team to a duo team and the kind of the evolution up front and why and what it allows them to do, and how last year they adopted pistol midway through the season and why and what it allows them to do. And he talks about modern defenses. And of course, that's the big talking point early on is kind of offenses are down across the league this year. And some of the keys to both quarterback play, navigating that, but then also from like a passing game structure and the importance of how many eligibles you're getting out to space the field and threaten it all. And how
I saw that clip. I did see that clip.
You know, so like all that's really good. But then Sean also talks about what that experience was like of winning the Super Bowl and how he felt, what he told himself before and how it was going to fulfill him. And I think a lot of people in a lot of different avenues and jobs can probably relate to if I just get this, I'll be happy, right? Or I'll be content, or I'll have checked the box. And that didn't happen for him. And he talked about what that was like. And I don't know, I thought it was very transparent and talked a lot about kind of what that experience in the years after have brought him to try to change what his perspective is and how he operates his daily life, which I thought was great too. So highly recommended.
Will do. Maybe Jalen Milroe's on the Jaden Daniels plan, Kyle Crabbs. Maybe so.
Man, Daniels. Or that's a show for another day.
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll get there. We'll get
show
there.
for another day.
We'll get there.
We are going to talk about Kelvin Banks Jr. first here. Left tackle for the University of Texas, and he is a big boy. I think that's the first thing. 6'4", 320, superb length. I think that stands out quite a bit when you just kind of get the off-the-bus impression of him as a player. I think he's got that body type that a lot of offensive line coaches are really going to be drawn to as well, because it looks like he's got room to add in his upper body, but he has like the mass in his lower half that allows you to carry, I think, a graceful center of gravity. Now, the application and how he continues to develop as an all-around player, I think there's some things that I kind of got the impression you and I kind of had the same takeaway on, but we haven't really talked about him yet. So the floor's yours.
I see the upside. I definitely see the upside, and why there's a lot of, projections of him to go high in the draft and highly ranked in different rankings that you look at. But I would say that I think he's more promised than he is a
product.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it feels like a player that everybody told you was supposed to be a high first-round pick at offensive tackle, and you can talk yourself into it, but it's just not really there quite yet, for me at least. I recognize, you mentioned the body type looks good, the length looks good. I think he's got good range in the run game. I mean, outstanding ability to get out in space and hit blocks, and that's all good. Lateral movement in, zone concepts looks good. But I will say that from a body control and balance perspective, I didn't see it, right? I saw a guy that fell off a lot of blocks, a guy that was more of a catcher than an assertive striker with his hands. Hands have a tendency to get wide, and some tightness even when he's trying to redirect against some of the counter moves. And so I think he's got to become a little bit more technical, staying rooted into the ground, playing with better leverage, staying under control with better coordination, and trusting your ability to sink your hips and present a sturdy base to operate from. So there's a lot to like, but this wasn't like I watched Joe Alt last year, this top 10 pick and offensive tackle. Like, oh yeah, that's it. Oh, that's it. Right. I don't feel that way about Kelvin Banks right now.
Yeah. It's a very different stratosphere of players. And I think the frustrating thing is you even watch him in the vertical run game. I thought Michigan was a good showcase of this. Some of the double teams he had with his left guard, he gets movement. So like he has power in his frame, but I don't think he applies it with regularity because, as you mentioned, being tethered to the ground through contact, and then the ability to create that jolt with your hands to kind of rock somebody's pads and kind of start that momentum.
Yeah.
I thought there were a lot of instances where he's in an isolation block and those things aren't where they need to be for him. And as a result, you kind of get these stalemates at the point of attack. And you see the physical ability to do it. It's just a matter of how do you unlock this with more regularity on a snap-by-snap basis? Because I agree with everything you said about the pros, and the athleticism in space is obvious. The length is obvious. How he forces you to run the loop with his length when he takes good angles with his pass sets is obvious, but it's just adding more polish. And I think that makes him a little bit more of a high variance outcome prospect. And you see it with offensive linemen all the time. Who's your coach? How regular is the consistency of the coaching that you're going to get? What's the stability of your coaching staff in general? And if it changes, do they change the scheme? And now all of a sudden you're a square peg in a round hole before you're able to really put the polish on your game. And like that's where if he goes somewhere that has a lot of leash and a well-established offensive line coach, I'll feel pretty good about it.
Right.
But I've also seen guys that look every bit of the part, that have all the athleticism, that have these questions, that make it to the league, and they don't stick. Now, they'll continue to get opportunities forever because he's built exactly how you would want an offensive tackle to be built. But is the quality of play going to be there?
And stability with the offensive line coach in infrastructure, I think, matters a ton for a player like this. So I'm kind of lukewarm on Banks. I'm lukewarm on Campbell, the LSU offensive lineman. So hopefully we can find us a tackle that I'm in love with.
I was going to say there's some in the Pac-12, but it's not true.
We got all the tackles
all the
were last year,
schools
man.
left, and now there's a new Pac-12 that's going to come. And there's some players. The question is just whether they're guards or tackles. But there's some more players in the well we can dip. And maybe we'll get one next week.
We'll keep searching. We'll find us a tackle that we really like. All right, folks, on the other side of it, really unique player, Harold Perkins. We're talking about him next. Be sure to stick with us. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like, or was that lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but as adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. What's something you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, or maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder because your back-to-school era can come at any age. It's helpful for learning positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. It's not just for those who've experienced major trauma. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you do is fill out a brief questionnaire. That'll get you matched with a licensed therapist. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn.
So Harold Perkins, linebacker, LSU, is our next player. He unfortunately did suffer an ACL tear in last weekend's game, so his season is over. And he's kind of at an interesting intersection of where he goes from here, because he can stay at LSU and come back and play. He's a junior. He could transfer somewhere else, or he could go pro. And I think the challenge for option A, stay at LSU and play. Joe, today is September 25th, 2024. How many sacks does Harold Perkins have since September 25th of 2023?
I don't know.
He's got 4.
Okay.
1 against Auburn, 1 against Alabama, 1 against LSU, and 1 against Texas A&M all last year at the end of the year. And one of those were in a QB spy as a second-level defender. Another one of them were just walked up on the edge and we're on the backside of a mesh point. The quarterback pulls the ball, and you just run right into him with an uncontested block. And it's like, this was one of those names that came in as a freshman and totally blew everybody away with the disruptive nature of how explosive he is and how he could reduce his surface level, even though you knew he was undersized. But they have really struggled since the Brian Kelly regime has really gotten its teeth into this program to optimize him as a player. And that kind of leaves you, I think, if you stay at LSU, with more questions than you will have answers.
Don't you feel like that is the question with Harold Perkins, is how do you optimize him? Because, I mean, he's listed at 6'1", 225, and I guess that's probably pretty close. And I think it's pretty clear that his biggest impact comes when you watch him in college. His biggest impact comes when he has a chance to rush, right? He's got speed, he's flexible, and that ability to really stress tackles with how explosive he is challenging for them to deal with. But he's 6'1", 225, and that's not a world that he can live in full-time on the edge in the NFL. And so, LSU plays him like not just off the edge, but as a Mike linebacker. They play him in the slot, like literally as a overhang, like slot corner at times. He's a unique player. And these types of players always make me nervous because I think you're always going to be at your best when you can be full-time at a position. I like the idea of positionless football. It sounds great. Chess pieces, put them all over the place, do all these cool things. Does that ever really happen? And so I get nervous about him being full-time, doing the thing it looks like he does best. But also, I mean, you watch him play linebacker, he's a slow processor, right? It's like not like a natural thing for him.
All ball's not going to be where he lives.
Okay, well, we have too many parts of the pie here that don't fit. I got, I got a little apple pie, I got a little peach pie, a little pumpkin pie. It doesn't really work together.
You got some Micah Parsons mixed with some JOK, mixed with some Hassan Reddick, mixed with
that all sounds good, right?
Right. I think Hassan Reddick's maybe the pathway to the most productive player. And Hassan came out in the draft process at 237 pounds. So you're going to have to add some mass. I think the good news is that process can probably start now.
Yeah.
If you choose to declare, that process can start now. And you probably will not be subjected to the testing, right? I would assume if you declared and you came through the combine in a pro day, would you do a pro day and test and do all the stuff if you're just now coming up? Probably not. I can't imagine that you would. So the scary thing for a team, though, is if Harold Perkins plays at 220, and I think maybe 225, I think I've seen like at sometimes he maybe didn't even crack 220.
He looks lean, man. He's not big.
Yeah. So if you have that kind of player, and there's no question, the explosiveness is electric. You get him in space and just let him attack. It's very obvious. But if you have to add that kind of weight and you don't get the testing with that kind of weight, how do you value that? And I think that's where Hassan went where he did, because he came in through the draft process and blew the doors off the Senior Bowl, and then he had great testing, and it allowed him to really jolt his stock. And Harold, I don't think is going to have the opportunity to do that if he chooses to come out in this year's class.
Other names like Yasir Abdullah, I think body type is somewhat similar there. He was 6'1", 237, ran 4.47. I think that could be, that would be a good path, I think, for Harold Perkins. I thought a little bit about Nolan Smith. He's 6'2" and an eighth, 238, 32 and 5/8 on the arm length, ran the 4.3s. And, it's not really working right now for Nolan Smith. We'll see. I don't, maybe that's maybe something to do with the two schemes in 2 years. But yeah, I'm really fascinated to see how the NFL prefers or doesn't prefer this type of player. I always find myself in a position with somebody like this where it's like, man, I kind of see the appeal, but I'd probably let somebody else try to figure it out, especially if you're talking about like a major investment in him. There's probably a certain point where I'd be like, yeah, okay, I'll try this and see, right? The value just seems to be too good. But I'm here to slander Brian Kelly all day long if you want to, but like I understand the confusion that comes with what to do with a guy like Harold Perkins. Yeah. And I think that Perkins has a tough choice to make, and he has 3 viable options to consider. And hopefully he makes the right one.
How about Nick Bonito?
Didn't Bonito get like to the 240s, right?
In the pre-draft process, yes. I don't know what he's playing at today.
Right.
But like
well, that's fair.
Oklahoma, Nick Bonito.
Yeah. He's a good player, right? Like,
and Bonito's probably a little longer. I mean, he came in at 6'3", but 32.5-inch arms. So there's some players that profile like this, but I think the days of mock drafts for me that include Harold Perkins in the first round are probably over. Just because now you have the injury dynamic on top of, like, yeah. and he could still come out and maybe be a day 2 player. But I just think predictively, you look at the questions, how they've tried to find other ways to utilize him, and that tape in those other spots doesn't necessarily inspire a lot of confidence that he's going to do that at the NFL level. And now you have a weight gain proposition in order to bulk up, but you're not going to get the testing on top of it. I just think if you read the tea leaves and you know how the NFL reacts to having incomplete boxes checked and knowing which ones are going to be incomplete for Harold Perkins, I probably wouldn't put him in the first round of another mock.
All right, we will see what the future holds for Mr. Harold Perkins Jr. Coming up next, this Stanford wide receiver made some big plays against Stanford, Colorado, the TCU game. We'll get into that on the other side of it, folks. Be sure to stick with us. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook.
Joe, I can't help but notice that you didn't mention his name. It's a big moment for us on the podcast. Get these right.
Elic
Ayomanor. Stanford wide receiver. Redshirt sophomore. Listed at 6'2", 210 pounds. Vertical down the field, explosive play, catch point. I think these are probably some of the superlatives that you would apply to him as a player. And he's kind of slacking this year. I don't think he had a single touchdown last year that was shorter than 40 yards.
Really? Wow. Yeah, I mean, I didn't know that, but like thinking of the games that I watched, they were long.
I'll get it exactly right because I can pull it up in a few clicks if you give me a minute. But the touchdown that he had against Syracuse was a 17-yarder. And that's like chump change for him relative to
bananas catch, though, right? Bananas catch.
Yes, it was. And he's got a couple bananas catches. Some of his touchdowns are absolutely bananas catches as well.
Pulling the ball off of Travis Hunter's head. I mean, come on. Come on. We got to mention that he's from Canada. We know the Canadians are very proud of their players that come through and are on the NFL's radar. And so he falls in line there. And he blew out his knee, right? He had a big-time knee injury as a freshman, tore everything, right? And so that's why he's a redshirt sophomore.
Correct.
But that's where he missed his first season with 6'2", 210 pounds. I think you highlighted a lot of the appealing things. A very physical player. That stands out in a big way. Body control, ball skills look good. You talk about a guy that you think can go out and win some leverage battles for you and present a valuable target for the receiver or for the quarterback, on some slants and glance routes and winning leverage on the perimeter. I think all that's there. He's physical with the ball in his hands, fun release packages. He's very interesting to me. I'm curious to see what type of development can happen as a route runner. But there's a baseline set of skill here and just a competitive edge that makes him very, very appealing to me.
Yeah. So 75 yards, 39 yards, 97 yards, 60 yards, 30 yards, and 51 yards were the length of his touchdown catches last year. And only a 17-yarder. Sorry, in September.
We had 3 of those against Colorado, right? I know the 97 and then
including the big one in overtime against Travis Hunter.
He's got more speed than Shiloh Sanders. He
can confirm he can outrun.
Didn't have the angle. Didn't the angle on that 97-yarder.
But
he was like a big time sprint. Didn't he went like a 100-meter sprint or something? He was in the low 10 seconds, I think, on that in high school. He's got some track background to him.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if they had that on his bio with the exact time that he had. You mentioned the route running development, and this is kind of where my question is with him. So he played last year full season. You mentioned he missed his true freshman season. If I asked you, out of the 513 total routes that he has run in his college career to date, how many types of routes has he ran more than 50 of?
Oh, boy. Maybe 3.
Any guesses on what they are?
Slants, hitches, and goes.
Okay, so goes, he's ran 116 goes on 513 routes.
Okay.
Hitches, he's ran 151. Slants is 47.
Oh, come on, we're right there.
That is the tied for the third highest route frequency that he's run.
What's the other one?
Crosses, shallow cross.
Okay.
So goes, hitches, 2 vertical stem routes, fastball and a changeup, and then slants and crossers underneath. It's like if you took what Brian Thomas's profile was and you cut a couple inches off the top of him, and I don't think he's going to run what Brian Thomas ran.
No, he won't.
And he's not as long as Brian Thomas is. Like that, it's a very parallel profile as far as his usage and role. And I think that's going to give some more confidence to Ayomanor's projection. But players that profile like this, a lot of times they do need time.
Yeah.
And they do need to develop because he doesn't have the raw height, weight, speed, hang your hat that Brian Thomas. And I was skeptical of Brian Thomas coming in with the utilization role that he had. He's looked great the first month of the season as a rookie. Looks like the best receiver on that roster for Jacksonville. But comfortably. And that's not a surprise if you watch Gabe Davis. But Christian Kirk's a different story. That's a show for another day. But that's kind of where I have forced myself to pull back and say, I don't want to make the same mistakes that I made with Brian Thomas, with the skepticism that I have about how he's going to profile. But at the same time, he doesn't have, I think, what makes Brian Thomas either.
At the risk of opening up a huge can of worms here, we see a lot of receivers that come into the NFL from the college ranks, and we talk about, I ran a limited route tree. And a lot of it is this same type of profile, right? They run those 3 routes. It was, they run 3 routes, slant, hitches, goes, crossers, whatever it is. And contextualizing how to apply that in an evaluation is increasingly difficult for me. Partly because, we know the NFL's coverage structures are zone heavy, too high shells, and it becomes a lot more incumbent on your ability to read leverage and find space in zones. And when we talk about the limited route tree, we think, can they separate from man coverage? And I think that's a fair question, but who's running that much man coverage right now in the NFL? It's not very common. And if that is the case, I think a lot of times separating from man coverage comes down to, can you get a little bit of protection and give guys a chance to run away from people? And can you get some rubs? And it's like, how much is required of this receiver to really be able to put a corner in a blender and create that separation? I'm not saying that that's not important, because it absolutely is. I'm just saying, when you don't see it, obviously, if they're not Jerry Jeudy as a route runner, how do we make sure that we don't crush a guy too much, right? Because of how schemes allow you to get around some of that.
Well, and I also think when you watch Ayomanor play, the ball skills are great. But the consistency of the separation down the field and stacking guys, like, he's got to be physical to get over top of guys a lot of times. And then if not, then it turns into back shoulder throws, and that's fine. But when you hang your hat on those kinds of targets in the NFL, I think the consistency in which your production, they're called 50-50 balls for a reason, right? Yeah. Like, it's just not the most high efficiency target that you can take.
Hey, this is probably a day 2 player. Probably where you kind of look at this guy, and he's a Stanford guy. It's a redshirt sophomore, so maybe he comes out,
right, and maybe he doesn't. And I think I can see the world in which it would benefit him at the end of the year to not come out and continue to try to build out his profile as a player. But I think it's probably, you hear some top 50 buzz. I would probably be lower than that on Ayomanor as a player right now, while still acknowledging there's a lot of potential growth for him that can indeed spur a more robust potential usage, and that would in turn raise his grade quite a bit.
Where are we going next week, Kyle Crabbs? Is this Emory Jones, this LSU tackle? Is he the one?
No, you don't want to watch a right tackle, do you?
I just want to watch a good tackle. How about Starks?
Malachi Starks, that's a great one for us.
All right, put him on the board.
I was just trying to find one more stat for you on.
Oh, sorry, I was transitioning.
No, that's all right. On Ayomanor. What do you think his average depth of target is?
17.6.
It's oddly specific.
Well, because I looked it up and knew that it was.
Oh, okay. Well, PFF has it at 17.2.
Oh. Was it your career or was that last season?
This season.
Okay.
14.1 in 2023. So we're going to do Malachi Starks, who is an elite football player.
I'll be the decider of that. No, sure. I've seen enough to know he's pretty special. I'm excited to see the full menu there, though.
Let's do. I'm going to get an offensive lineman in here.
This Minnesota offensive lineman has hard names.
Let's do him. Ariante.
It's wild. Glad you didn't pick this Arizona offensive lineman. That looks even more difficult.
Yeah, he's kind of good though. So we won't wait too long on him.
Starks, the Minnesota offensive lineman.
Do you want a skill player?
For the people, right? The people want the skill players.
All right, let's do.
This might not be the skill player draft. The best skill player I've watched so far is that Boise State running back. Well, I mean, that McMillan's good, the Arizona receiver.
Travis Hunter, if you put him on that side of the ball.
That's true. All right, that was crazy. That was a little bit wrong there.
Let's go with the tight end, Colston Loveland.
All right, there it is.
There you go. That's next week here on Locked On NFL Scouting. We do draft on Wednesdays. Tomorrow we're getting ready for week 4 of the 2024 NFL season. Setting the table there. We hope you will join us. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make it a great rest of your day. We are out of here.